Hi everyone, today we're going to do Anchor 4, homeostasis and cell transport. If we look at the word homeostasis, we can break it down into home, stasis. Stasis means keep constant, the home. So we keep our body at a constant. And cell transport is transporting things into the cell and out of the cell. So if we look at the word homeostasis, like I said, maintaining a constant internal state. We want to make sure that our body temperature is always 98.6 or relatively around that. We don't want our body temperature to be 104. That would be out of homeostasis. We want to make sure that the amount of fluids going into the body is regulated enough that the amount of fluids going out of the body maintains that constant internal environment. How do cells then accomplish this homeostasis? It's through cell transport. If we look at the word cell transport, what is transported into the cell and what is transported out of the cell? If we look at Anchor 1, what is responsible for moving things into and out of the cell? It's the cell membrane. There are two types of cell transport that we talked about this year. The first one is passive transport. If you look at the word passive, passive means no energy required. When we look at it in terms of biology, we say that passive transport moves from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. This would be like if you spilled lemonade and you put a paper towel, the paper towel would fill up with the lemonade that was spilled. It wouldn't require any energy, it would just move along the gradient. Another example of passive transport is when you spray air freshener. If you can recall that I did that earlier in the year, if you spray air freshener in the beginning or in the front of the class, it will diffuse all the way into the rest of the classroom so that by the time the period ends, the entire classroom is filled with the air freshener. A second type of transport is active transport. Active transport requires movement against the gradient. This would be like you swimming against a lazy river. This would be like you climbing up a slide. This would be like you using energy from an area of low concentration to an area of high concentration. Therefore, ATP is required. On this slide here, there are three types of passive transport. If I say diffusion, I want you to think glucose, movement of substances. No energy is required again for passive. If I say osmosis, I want you to automatically think water. Water moves across the cell membrane. Again, no energy is required. Facilitated diffusion, this is when we did the dialysis tubing. It's movement of substances with the concentration gradient. Again, no energy is required, but they're so big that they need the help of a protein. So what you should associate with facilitated diffusion is it involves proteins. I have YouTube videos here for you to watch. Hopefully you will find these useful. If we look under the terms of water, and we see in the third column over, it mentions water diffuses. All three of these solutions, hypertonic, isotonic, and hypertonic, all three of these involve water. So if we look at the next slide, hypertonic, many particles, little water. As a result, if something is placed in a hypertonic solution, this would be like very salty water, and you placed a cell in a very salty solution, what would happen is the water would flow out of the cell into the salt water, out of the cell, and it would cause it to shrink. If you remember, this was the gummy bear that was placed in salt solution and it shrunk. Hypo, oh no. Hippo, it's going to blow. Hypotonic, there are few particles and it's lots of water. Therefore, if you place a cell in a hypotonic solution, it's very watery. So therefore, the water wants to move from the solution into the cell, from an area of high to an area of low, and therefore it swells. This is the example where the gummy bear became extremely large. All we did was put it in a solution of water and it became 3 times the size. Isotonic means the amount of water in the fluid and the amount of water outside or inside the cell is equal. Really, all you need to know for isotonic is the outside is equal to the inside. Therefore, it doesn't shrink. Therefore, it doesn't swell. Now we switch to active pumps. Active, if you are active, you require energy. So if we look at the active transports, they require energy. Since it requires energy, it goes against the concentration gradient. If it goes against the concentration gradient, it goes from low to high. It needs energy to be able to move. An example of a pump is sodium-potassium pump. And I have a YouTube video there for you to watch. Another example of active transport is endocytosis and exocytosis. If we look at the differences, endocytosis is movement of substances into a cell. And notice the color there. Endocytosis is purple and the word into is purple. This would be like your white blood cells eating a bacteria. The bacteria is outside the cell. The white blood cell eats the bacteria and brings the bacteria into the cell. Exocytosis means out of the cell. You see the word EX like exit, and if it exits, it moves out of the cell. That would be an example of the cell bursting out. Things like you almost would think of it like a pimple releasing the stuff outside of the cell. Energy is required for both of these. So here I have a bunch of words. Vocabulary words. Concentration gradient. Osmosis. Equilibrium. Diffusion. Endocytosis. Active transport. Facilitated diffusion. Hypotonic. Hypertonic. Passive transport. Exocytosis. Membrane pumps. And isotonic. What I'd like for you to do is to place them in 2 categories. One category is passive and one is active. And then break it down. Which ones are passive? Give me an example of the 3 types of passive and the 3 types of active using these words.